Chapter 13. Zach looked down at the planner in his lap, and realized he'd spent the last 15 minutes staring out the window, wondering what Mark and Dani were doing, instead of working out the lesson plans he'd been working on. Giving up for now, he closed the planner and went into the kitchen. Since he'd kissed Dani on his way out the night before, he'd been unable to keep her off his mind. Hell, if he was honest with himself, he'd been unable to keep her off his mind since he'd seen her a week earlier in the coffee shop. Since he'd known for sure she was back in town. Last night he'd spent hours tossing and turning as images of her, dreams of her went through his mind. Memories of things that had once been between them, fantasies he'd once had about things that could be. Even now, though things had changed, he dreamt of what could be. More than once last night he'd seen her in a stunning white dress. He frowned, realizing he was doing it again. Glancing around, he tried to remember why he'd come into the kitchen, but came up blank. Zach poured himself a glass of water and stood in front of the sink, sipping it while he looked out the window at the lake. The breeze was picking up, and there were several sailboards not too far away. He wondered if he could talk Dani into going out with him, and what she'd look like in a bathing suit. Would it be something Mark would pick up? How much trouble would he have? Zach set his glass on the counter, went to the back door and stepped outside. A hint of pine, mixed with the slightly fishy odor of the lake hit him, as Zach closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His head tipped back so he could feel the warmth of the sun on his face. Days like today were part of why he loved teaching. It wasn't just the kids, though he loved the kids. He liked having the summers off to spend as he wanted. Well, to an extent, there was always something to be done even in the summer, like lesson plans. Nope, today was too beautiful to be trapped inside. He pulled out his pole and went to the short dock not far from the back door of his cabin. Today was a day to be spent outside. It only took a few minutes to bait a hook and toss it out, then he sat on the edge of the dock with his feet dangling in the water. He didn't care if he caught anything. Being here fishing was enough for now. The sun had almost set when Zach called it a day, packed up his gear and went inside. He'd caught a few fish but nothing big enough to keep, so he tossed them back. He was content. He'd long been of the philosophy that a bad day on the lake was better than a good day in the office, and while he hadn't caught much, it still hadn't been a bad day. Zach stepped inside and looked around. He should do something for dinner, but he didn't feel like cooking, not just for himself. He'd think about it a while, maybe he had something in the freezer he could heat up, he'd look in a minute. Wandering into the living room, he spotted his phone on the arm of the sofa, and picked it up. The notification light was flashing. He'd missed 2 calls and had 4 new texts. Checking his texts first, he found 3 from his mom. The first was telling him she'd seen Dani and Dani had shown her pictures of Mark. She'd gushed about how much he looked like Zach at that age. The last from her was asking why he wasn't answering. He sent her a quick response letting her know he was fine, he'd just left his phone inside when he'd gone out. The last text was from Dani. She sent a picture of Mark holding something made of Legos, a huge grin on his face. A heavy sensation hit Zach in the chest. It took his breath away for a moment. He loved that the little boy found joy in something he still enjoyed. It took him a moment to notice the text had a caption too. He wanted to share it with you. Just that easily, the weight got heavier. He sat on the arm of the couch for a moment while he stared at the photo, and waited for the rush of feelings that threatened to overwhelm him to pass. Once he could breathe normally again, he forwarded the picture to his parents, then replied to Dani, thanking her for sharing and asking how her day had been. That done, he pocketed his phone and went into the kitchen. He needed to find something to eat.